What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 9 sleepers and studs.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to give you a sleeper pick and my favorite stud at each position.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, NFL Week 9, let's take a look at the quarterback position. My quarterback stud is Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks playing the Buffalo Bills, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Russell Wilson has averaged 32 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5 rush attempts per game. He scored 29, 36, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's been on fire this season. He looks unstoppable at quarterback. He's going to be about 8% owned, projected at 24.8 fantasy points here in Week 9. He's $7,600 DraftKings salary and $1,400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 54.5 points scored in this game, with the Seahawks favored by 3. So it's a high-scoring game, a close, competitive game, and a decent matchup. So it's hard to get away from Russell Wilson in a high-scoring game and a competitive game, because if he's going to be throwing the ball all the way through the fourth quarter, he should be able to rack up a ton of fantasy points. So I like Russell Wilson here versus the Buffalo Bills. Okay, my sleeper pick at the quarterback position is Drew Lock from the Denver Broncos playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Drew Lock, he's only averaged 10.8 fantasy points per game on the season, but he scored 21 fantasy points last game. He's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 17.2 fantasy points here in Week 9, and you're going to save some salary with this pick. He's only $5,200 DraftKings salary and $2,000 more on FanDuel. So I like that price on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50 points scored in this game, and they have the Denver Broncos trailing by 4. So you got a fantastic matchup here. Jerry Jeudy is an emerging wide receiving target, and they might get Tim Patrick back for this game, which would be a nice boost to Lock's chances of having a good game. He's facing one of the worst coverage teams in the NFL. So if he's going to have a good game, I think it's going to be this one. So I like Drew Lock as a low salary, high risk, high reward play here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. My Week 9 running back stud, I just want to reinforce this pick. I feel strongly about this one. I like James Conner from the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have the 5th worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. James Conner has averaged 17 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 15.7 rush attempts per game and 3.3 pass targets per game. He scored 15, 14, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's going to be about 14% owned, projected at 17.4 fantasy points here in Week 9. He's $6,900 DraftKings salary and $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 41.5 points scored in this game, and they have the Pittsburgh Steelers favored by 14. So you have a fantastic matchup, and although it's not going to be a high-scoring game, the Pittsburgh Steelers should score most of the points in this game. Dallas defense has been awful this season. I don't expect that to change anytime soon. James Conner could get a ton of work here running out the clock in the fourth quarter. So I like James Conner here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, it was hard to pick a sleeper pick here at the running back position. I actually would just spend up for running back this week. There's not too many pay down options here on the slate, but if you are looking to save some salary at the running back position, take a look at Devin Singletary from the Buffalo Bills playing the Seattle Seahawks, who have the second worst defense overall and they're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Devin Singletary has averaged 10.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.6 rush attempts per game and 3.8 pass targets per game. He's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 10.5 fantasy points here in week 9, and he's only $4,700 DraftKings salary and $1,100 more on FanDuel. So we know it's going to be a high-scoring game. 54.5 points scored in this game, with the Bills trailing by 3. So it's a decent matchup here. They should be able to move the ball on the Seattle Seahawks. Devin Singletary could get some goal line carries, and he is involved in the passing game. So I like Devin Singletary here versus the Seattle Seahawks.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. My wide receiver stud is Keenan Allen from the LA Chargers playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing wide receivers. Keenan Allen has averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 10.7 pass targets per game. He scored 22 and 26 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 11 and 13 pass targets. So he's getting a ton of volume. He's got a good matchup here versus the cornerback in the slot. He lines up in the slot 45% of the time, so he should have a good matchup for most of the game here, and he's going to be about 27% owned, projected at 18.6 fantasy points here in week 9. He's on the field for 84% of the snaps, and he's $7,000 DraftKings salary and $500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, and they've got this one pretty close, with the Chargers only favored by 1. So I like that it's going to be a close, competitive game. So I like Keenan Allen here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, my wide receiver sleeper pick is Christian Kirk from the Arizona Cardinals playing the Miami Dolphins, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Christian Kirk has averaged 12.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.3 pass targets per game. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 21, 23, and 13 fantasy points off of 8, 3, and 7 pass targets. He's on the field for 71% of the snaps, and he's only going to be about 1% owned, projected at 11.6 fantasy points here in week 9. He's $5,300 DraftKings salary and $600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, with the Cardinals favored by 4. So I like this matchup. He's been fantastic the past few weeks. I think he's going to be a big factor in this game. So I like Christian Kirk here versus the Miami Dolphins. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. My tight end stud is Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the LA Chargers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Darren Waller has averaged 14.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.7 pass targets per game. He played in a bad weather game last game, only scored 8 fantasy points off of 6 pass targets, but he's on the field for 90% of the snaps. He's going to be about 19% owned, projected at 14.5 fantasy points here in week 9. He's $5,800 DraftKings salary and $600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Raiders trailing by 1. So fantastic matchup here. This guy gets a ton of pass targets, and he should have a nice bounce back game. So I like Darren Waller here versus the LA Chargers. Okay, my sleeper pick at the tight end position is TJ Hawkinson from the Detroit Lions playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have the absolute worst defense overall, and they give up the 13th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. TJ Hawkinson has averaged 12.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.9 pass targets per game. He got 10 pass targets last game, scored 14 fantasy points. He's on the field for 70% of the snaps, and he's not even going to be 1% owned, projected at 11.9 fantasy points here in week 9. He's $5,100 DraftKings salary and $900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Lions trailing by 4.5. So the problem with this pick is that Matthew Stafford is out with COVID-19, so it will be Chase Daniel at quarterback, and the hope is with this play is that maybe he checks it down to the tight end and hits TJ Hawkinson for a bunch of targets or a red zone touchdown. But you can see why people have come off of this pick here, because for only $700 more, you could go with Darren Waller, who's in a much better spot with his starting quarterback, Derek Carr. But that's what makes TJ Hawkinson a sneaky sleeper pick here versus the Minnesota Vikings.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video, or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.